The story begins in the distant age of legends, when the world was ruled by warriors whose strength bordered on the divine. A legendary sword saint effortlessly cleaves through an entire army with a single earth-shattering slash. Moments later, a monstrous spearman unleashes a terrifying strike powerful enough to split a colossal mountain in two. High above the battlefield, a peerless archer draws back his bow and releases a brilliant, radiant arrow that tears through the sky, blasting countless falling meteors out of existence before they can reach the earth. These untouchable titans weren't merely warriors, they were living legends whose overwhelming power shaped the very world itself. Their names became the foundation of myths, and their impossible feats echoed across history for generations. During the ancient wars, these godlike heroes clashed in cataclysmic battles for absolute supremacy, each collision carrying enough force to rewrite the landscape itself. But in an instant, the breathtaking scale of those glorious legends is abruptly shattered. The radiant battlefields disappear, replaced by the cold, suffocating darkness of an underground prison cell. Damp stone walls, rusted iron bars, and an eerie silence consume the room. Standing deep within the grim shadows is a rugged, heavily scarred man with his arms folded across his chest. A dangerously confident, almost manic grin slowly stretches across his weathered face, as though the ancient legends the world worships mean absolutely nothing to him. With an ice-cold voice, the scarred man completely shatters the myth surrounding these so-called invincible gods. He boldly declares that every single one of those legendary, seemingly immortal heroes can be killed just like anyone else. Sitting across from him on the cold stone floor, two young boys covered in bruises and tattered clothes are left completely speechless. One can only stare in wide-eyed disbelief, struggling to process such an outrageous claim. But the other boy reacts differently. His gaze sharpens, piercing through the darkness with an intense curiosity burning in his eyes. Locking eyes with the scarred prisoner, he quietly asks a single question. How? The rugged man's face slowly stretches into a chilling, knowing smile, his expression barely visible beneath the heavy shadows of the prison cell. Silence fills the room. The young boy swallows hard, never taking his eyes off the mysterious prisoner. Sensing the unwavering determination in the child's gaze, the scarred man grins even wider before slowly leaning forward. Then, in a low and unsettling voice, he makes a terrifying promise. If the boy is truly prepared to bear the burden, he will teach him a forbidden technique. A blade created to cut down all creation itself. The sword of inevitable death. The gloomy prison fades away in an instant, replaced by the vibrant streets of a magnificent city bathed in warm sunlight. The camera descends from a towering royal castle before settling on a lively tavern overflowing with laughter, clashing mugs, and drunken cheers. Inside, a heavily armed swordsman slams his boot onto a wooden stool, roaring with laughter as ale splashes across the table. Nearby, a young waitress scowls in obvious annoyance while the elderly barkeep calmly polishes a mug behind the counter, seemingly unfazed by the commotion. The old barkeep calmly remarks that men like him only put on a loud, fearless act to hide the fear buried deep inside. They're terrified that if they don't bark louder than everyone else, they'll be looked down upon, cast aside, and left to starve. So, with a weary smile, he tells the waitress not to let it bother her and simply learn to live with it. Letting out an exhausted sigh, the waitress mutters that even her patience has its limits. Just then, the lively atmosphere shifts. The tavern's heavy wooden doors slowly creak open, and a small cloaked figure steps out of the bright sunlight into the dim, dusty room. Expecting yet another loud, arrogant swordsman, the waitress watches carefully. Instead, the mysterious figure quietly shuffles toward the counter. With trembling hands, he gently places a few pitiful copper coins onto the bar. His body is covered in bruises, his clothes are worn and tattered, and exhaustion is written across every inch of his face. Offering an awkward, nervous smile, he softly asks whether those few coins are enough to buy even a small piece of bread and a little water. Moved by the boy's miserable condition, the old barkeep silently slides a dry piece of bread across the counter. As the stranger slowly pulls back his hood, his young face instantly brightens with genuine relief. Watching from nearby, the waitress can't help but stare in disbelief. Quietly mocking him to herself, she wonders if this is really what a swordsman looks like, a skinny, bruised, starving boy who seems too weak to defend himself. But as the boy settles into a quiet corner and begins eating, his sharp eyes suddenly shift toward the table beside him. Amid the constant chatter, clinking mugs, and drunken laughter, a single conversation instantly captures his attention. A rumor. A rumor about a monstrous swordsman wandering the land. The boy pauses mid-drink as the voices from the next table grow louder. Two rugged mercenaries are eagerly discussing an undefeated warrior feared across the continent, the infamous Mage Blade Slayer. Even they can't decide whether the man is truly real, or merely another legend born from myth. The two mercenaries can hardly believe the rumors. According to the whispers spreading across the kingdom, the legendary sword god himself personally invited such a dangerous monster to participate in the upcoming tournament, the Bedlam of the 100 Blades. The event is hailed as the greatest sword-fighting tournament in history, where 100 of the world's most elite swordsmen will gather to determine who truly stands at the pinnacle of all warriors. Hearing the word monster, the boy quietly lowers his gaze, seemingly lost in thought. Before he can dwell on it any longer, a steaming bowl of rich meat stew gently slides onto his table. Looking up, he sees the waitress offering him a warm, gentle smile. "It's on the house," she says. The boy's eyes instantly light up with gratitude. Smiling from ear to ear, he repeatedly thanks her before eagerly digging into the hot meal, savoring every bite as though it's the best food he's had in days. Watching him eat with such enthusiasm, the waitress can't help but grow curious. Leaning slightly across the counter, she smiles and asks, "So, what brings a scrawny kid like you all the way to the royal capital?" For the first time, the boy's cheerful expression fades. His face grows unexpectedly serious as he quietly explains that there's someone in this city he absolutely has to meet. The waitress lets out a small sigh before telling him he couldn't have chosen a worse time to visit. The royal capital is overflowing with travelers, mercenaries, and swordsmen because of the upcoming Bedlam of the 100 Blades. Hearing that, the boy immediately recalls the tournament's legendary reward. The victor isn't awarded gold or fame. Instead, they're granted a single wish, any wish they desire. The waitress nods, confirming that the prize has drawn countless ambitious fighters from every corner of the kingdom. Even though the official roster is already full, desperate swordsmen continue pouring into the capital every day, hoping to beg, bargain, or somehow earn a place in the tournament. Taking another look at the boy's bruised face, worn clothes, and exhausted body, she gently warns him to stay careful. In a city overflowing with powerful warriors, someone as battered and vulnerable as him could find trouble before he even realizes it. The waitress lets out a small chuckle before teasing that a frail-looking kid like him is bound to attract trouble sooner or later. The boy simply smiles warmly and scratches the back of his cheek. Despite how he looks, he humbly replies that he knows enough swordsmanship to at least protect himself. But the very instant those words leave his mouth, a massive, fully armored thug is suddenly hurled through the air like a ragdoll. The enormous man crashes into the tavern with explosive force, smashing straight through several heavy wooden tables. Splinters, shattered mugs, and clouds of dust erupt in every direction, leaving the entire room frozen in shock. Startled by the deafening impact, the waitress instinctively stumbles backward as debris rains across the floor. Standing over the groaning thug is a tall, imposing man draped in a dark crimson coat, a smoking pipe resting between his lips while a sword hangs calmly at his side. Without the slightest hesitation, he plants his boot onto the defeated man's chest. Looking down with complete contempt, he calls the thug nothing more than worthless trash. A cruel smirk slowly creeps across his face as he mocks the man for daring to call himself a swordsman. If you can't handle a little heat, don't disgrace the title. Still wearing that chilling smile, he presses the glowing hot metal of his pipe against the thug's cheek. A blood-curdling scream echoes throughout the tavern as the man's flesh sizzles from the intense heat. The man in red doesn't even blink. He simply watches with cold amusement as the thug writhes in agony before finally losing consciousness from the unbearable pain. Satisfied, the mysterious swordsman slowly lifts his gaze and surveys the silent tavern. A faint smile crosses his lips. It seems he's finally found exactly what he was looking for. A tavern filled with swordsmen. Without another word, he casually walks across the room and takes the empty seat beside the young boy. Calmly, he orders himself a mug of ale. The terrified waitress instinctively opens her mouth to protest. Before she can utter a single word, the man instantly draws his sword, the gleaming blade stopping only inches from her throat. His voice turns ice cold. "Shut up, and bring me my drink." The entire tavern falls deathly silent. Seeing no other choice, the elderly barkeep quietly slides a full mug of ale across the counter. Keeping his head lowered, he does everything he can to avoid provoking the dangerous stranger. Watching the old man's trembling hands, the man in red lets out an amused smirk. He grabs the mug, takes a long, satisfying gulp, and drinks without the slightest concern for the terrified atmosphere surrounding him. Only after finishing his drink does he slowly turn his attention toward the boy seated beside him. Tilting his head ever so slightly, he studies the young stranger for a brief moment before casually asking if he's a swordsman. And if so, what sword style he practices. The boy blinks in mild confusion, clearly caught off guard by the sudden question. Scratching the back of his head with a sheepish grin, the boy admits that he doesn't really belong to any particular sword style. He casually explains that everything he knows was simply taught to him by an old man he happened to know. The man in red lets out a faint scoff before looking away. "I thought so." Slowly closing his eyes, he senses the countless flashy mana signatures radiating from the warriors around the tavern, all glaring at him with barely restrained killing intent. Then, his gaze returns to the boy. His cold, piercing eyes carefully study the young swordsman for a moment before he speaks. "What surprises me, is that I can't sense even the slightest trace of mana from you." He tilts his head slightly, genuinely curious. "Is it some kind of illness, or were you simply born completely powerless?" With calm confidence, the man begins explaining that for every martial artist, mastering the flow of mana is the very foundation of strength. True warriors circulate mana throughout their bodies, reinforcing every movement, or channel it directly into their weapons to unleash overwhelming destructive power. To prove his point, he slowly raises a clenched fist. A fierce crimson aura instantly erupts around his hand, filling the tavern with an oppressive wave of heat. Staring directly into the boy's eyes, he coldly declares that with nothing but this mana alone, even a single finger would be enough to crack the boy's skull like an eggshell. The boy doesn't flinch. Instead, he simply smiles softly. And quietly agrees. Finding the conversation utterly boring, the man loses all interest. With a disappointed sigh, he rises from his seat and reaches for the hilt of his massive sword. "I have no interest in fighting worthless trash." The moment the blade leaves its sheath, a monstrous shockwave explodes through the tavern. With a single effortless swing, the massive sword tears through the building, blasting apart tables, chairs, mugs, and everything in its path. Armed mercenaries are hurled across the room as the entire tavern is consumed by flying debris and clouds of dust. Standing proudly amidst the wreckage, the crimson-coated warrior raises his blade and roars his name for everyone to hear. David Evro, the legendary mage blade slayer. The battered swordsmen scattered across the floor freeze in absolute terror. The moment they hear that name, the color drains from their faces. David glares across the ruined tavern before letting out a frustrated growl. He declares that he came to the royal capital to challenge the strongest swordsman alive, but he's already grown sick of waiting for the bedlam of the 100 blades to begin. Sweeping his glowing sword across the devastated room, he lets his murderous aura surge outward before demanding to know. "Is there anyone here worthy of satisfying me?" Then, a faint movement among the scattered rubble catches his attention. Kneeling amidst the shattered floorboards is the young boy. Completely unfazed by the suffocating killing intent filling the tavern, he calmly reaches down and picks up a piece of bread that had fallen into the rubble. The entire room watches in stunned silence. David narrows his eyes in annoyance as the boy casually brushes the dust off the bread. "It's still edible," the boy quietly mutters. David's expression darkens. With an icy glare, he asks what exactly the boy thinks he's doing. Without answering immediately, the boy simply takes a bite. After calmly finishing his mouthful, he wipes his lips and slowly rises to his feet. Meeting David's gaze without the slightest hint of fear, he calmly says that if David wants to pick a fight, that's his business. But destroying an innocent tavern is going too far. Then, with a completely straight face, the boy quietly suggests they take the fight outside. David freezes. For a brief moment, the entire tavern falls into complete silence. Then the giant warrior suddenly erupts into booming, maniacal laughter. He can hardly believe what he just heard. A scrawny kid with absolutely no mana has the audacity to challenge him. But just as suddenly as it began, the laughter stops. A murderous shadow creeps across David's face as his eyes lock onto the boy. His voice turns ice cold as he promises that this little joke will cost the boy his life. The boy's expression hardens. Staring directly into David's eyes, he calmly replies that he isn't joking. He adds that he despises people like David, those who believe strength gives them the right to do whatever they please. Without another word, the boy walks out of the ruined tavern and steps into the open city square. David follows close behind with a mocking scoff. Too late for regrets. The instant the words leave his mouth, he swings his massive sword downward with overwhelming force. The boy calmly draws his plain sword. David explodes forward at terrifying speed, his heavy blade crashing toward the ground with enough force to split the stone beneath it. But the boy effortlessly deflects the devastating strike. Without giving him a moment to breathe, David launches himself high into the air before diving down with another crushing slash. A shower of brilliant sparks erupts as the boy flawlessly parries the attack. Again. And again. David unleashes a relentless barrage of earth-shattering swings, each one powerful enough to pulverize the ground beneath them. Yet the boy calmly intercepts every single strike with flawless precision. For the first time, David's eyes widen in genuine shock. Despite possessing absolutely no mana whatsoever, the kid's raw swordsmanship is unbelievably refined. His technique is so precise that it completely defies common sense. But that disbelief is quickly swallowed by overwhelming rage. Roaring in fury, David declares that the boy's arrogance disgusts him. He tightens his grip around his sword. In an instant, a blinding crimson aura erupts from the blade, flooding the battlefield with scorching heat as flames violently coil around the weapon. With a prideful grin, David finally unveils his ultimate technique. The Red Rock style, flame formation sword. A blazing crimson aura engulfs his weapon as scorching heat ripples through the air. David coldly warns the boy that his blade is no ordinary sword. It is forged from pure mana, and anything it touches will be reduced to nothing but ash. Without wasting another second, David surges forward. In the blink of an eye, his burning crimson blade comes crashing down with terrifying speed. The boy instinctively raises his sword to block. But the overwhelming force, combined with the unbearable heat, proves too much. Crack! A sharp fracture echoes across the square as the plain steel blade chips under the immense pressure of David's mana-infused sword. A smug grin spreads across David's face. He mocks the boy, declaring that an ordinary weapon can never withstand the power of true mana. Sliding backward across the shattered stone, the boy lowers his eyes toward the damaged edge of his sword. After a brief pause, he quietly admits that the long and exhausting journey to the capital has truly dulled his blade. David points his sword directly at him. With complete arrogance, he boasts that this is the unbridgeable gap between a true swordsman and a half-baked amateur who could never hope to surpass him. But before the boy can recover, David strikes again. Raising his blazing sword high above his head, he pours an enormous amount of mana into the blade before unleashing a colossal wave of crimson fire. The blazing inferno races toward the boy like a raging tidal wave. At the last possible moment, the boy narrowly slips aside. The attack misses him. But it doesn't stop. His eyes suddenly widen as he realizes where it's headed. The terrified barkeep immediately shouts for everyone to get down. A split second later, The massive fireball crashes into the city square. A deafening explosion erupts, reducing the surrounding stone to rubble and hurling innocent bystanders violently across the streets. The elderly barkeep desperately throws himself over the trembling waitress, shielding her from the devastating blast as flames and debris rain down around them. Standing proudly in the middle of the burning destruction, David lets out a disappointed scoff. Annoyed that his attack failed to hit its target, he barely even glances at the civilians caught in the explosion. Hearing those words, the boy freezes. A chilling silence surrounds him as his eyes slowly lock onto David. Pure fury begins to burn behind his calm expression. What enrages him isn't the attack itself. It's the fact that David recklessly dragged innocent people into their battle without the slightest hint of remorse. David simply bursts into laughter. Wearing a twisted, arrogant smile, he dismisses the terrified civilians as nothing more than ants crawling beneath his feet. To him, the weak are merely insects. Existence is destined to be crushed by those with greater strength. The moment those cruel words leave David's mouth, the boy falls completely silent. A cold, terrifying shadow falls across the boy's eyes as he fixes his unwavering gaze on David. At that moment, he's had enough. His mind is suddenly pulled back to the dark prison cell from years ago. He sees the scarred prisoner once again, wearing that same twisted, maniacal smile as he calmly confessed to slaughtering people for one simple reason. They were weak. To that man, the weak were nothing more than worthless scraps, lives with no value beyond being trampled by the strong. The memory fades. Returning to the present, the boy quietly reaches up, removes his tattered cloak, and lets it fall onto the broken stone beneath him. Looking David straight in the eye, he calmly says, "You remind me of someone." He then kneels beside the rubble and casually picks up a small, dull bread knife lying among the debris. David stares in complete disbelief. Holding nothing but the tiny kitchen knife, the boy calmly declares that he refuses to accept a world where strength alone decides what is right. A world where the powerful can do whatever they please while the weak are treated as disposable. For the first time, David completely loses his composure. The veins across his forehead bulge as his face twists with uncontrollable rage. He bellows at the top of his lungs, convinced the boy has finally gone insane. A bread knife against him. But the boy remains perfectly calm. Slowly raising the tiny blade, he makes a chilling declaration. He'll prove that taking a life doesn't require flashy magic, nor overwhelming power. Pushed far beyond his limit, David unleashes every ounce of mana within his body. A colossal pillar of crimson flames erupts around him, scorching the very air as an overwhelming pressure sweeps across the battlefield. His killing intent reaches its absolute peak. Roaring that he'll reduce the boy to ashes, David launches himself high into the sky before unleashing his ultimate secret art. Gutatsu. A catastrophic, building-sized tsunami of pure, concentrated flames descends upon the city, swallowing everything in its path. Yet, the boy never flinches. His piercing blue eyes remain locked on the approaching inferno. In a calm voice, he quietly mutters that if mana, and the flames born from it, are both created and controlled by humans, then they must also possess a weakness. And his sword exists for one purpose: to strike that exact point. A brilliant flash erupts. The boy explodes forward with unbelievable speed, gripping nothing but the dull bread knife. Then, he swings. A deafening shockwave tears across the city square as the tiny blade pierces directly into the heart of the blazing inferno. In a single instant, the seemingly unstoppable sea of flames is split apart. The catastrophic firestorm shatters before everyone's eyes, its overwhelming power collapsing into nothingness as though it had never existed at all. The raging inferno is instantly extinguished. The blazing crimson aura is violently snuffed out as if it never existed. David's eyes shoot wide open in absolute disbelief. He can only watch in horror as the boy doesn't merely cut through the flames. He slices the flames themselves apart. A look of utter shock flashes across David's face before it is instantly consumed by uncontrollable rage. With a furious roar, he channels every remaining ounce of strength into his sword and launches himself straight at the boy, thrusting his blade forward with murderous intent. The boy doesn't retreat. Without relying on brute force, he calmly steps into the attack. With nothing but flawless technique, he redirects David's overwhelming strike. Clang! A shower of blazing crimson sparks erupts as steel collides with steel. The impact echoes across the shattered city square. In one perfectly timed motion, David's massive sword is violently knocked from his grasp. It spins helplessly through the air as the fiery aura surrounding it shatters into countless glowing fragments before fading into nothingness. Silence falls over the battlefield. As the smoke slowly begins to clear, the boy casually turns his back and walks away without sparing David another glance. In a calm voice, he quietly mutters the name of his terrifying technique. Zetsujin. A faint smile appears on his face. Finally. His blade has regained its edge. Behind him, David collapses onto his knees. His entire body trembles uncontrollably. His breathing becomes ragged as he stares at his shaking hands, unable to comprehend what has just happened. Then the horrifying truth finally dawns on him. The boy didn't simply block his attack. He cut the mana itself. Standing calmly within the fading smoke, the boy slowly turns around. His piercing blue eyes remain locked on the trembling warrior before him. In a composed voice, he explains that his swordsmanship belongs to no school, no lineage, and no recognized style. More importantly, it doesn't require even a single drop of mana. Just as the heavens and the earth exist without needing anyone's approval. His sword simply exists. No tricks. No magic. No miracles. Just absolute mastery. The terrifying realization finally crushes David's spirit. Still kneeling, he stares up at the seemingly frail young boy with wide, trembling eyes. His voice shakes as he whispers the truth he desperately tried to deny. The Real Mage Blade Slayer. The boy calmly tells David that he has never cared much for that bloodstained title. But there's one thing he refuses to tolerate. Watching an arrogant fraud steal that name just to terrorize innocent people. For a brief moment, David remains frozen. Then, his horrified expression twists into a wide, bloodthirsty grin. Instead of fear, he bursts into laughter. Roaring with excitement, David admits that he only stole the title of Mage Blade Slayer for one reason. To lure the strongest warriors in the world directly to him. And now, a genuine legend is standing right in front of him. Gripping his massive sword with renewed excitement, David lets out a deafening scream and desperately tries to ignite his blazing crimson flames one final time. But nothing happens. The fiery aura is completely dead. As David freezes in pure panic, staring at his useless weapon, the boy calmly reminds the giant of the horrifying truth. His technique doesn't just block magic, the strike literally severed the mana flowing inside David's very body. With a swift, brutal smack from the handle of the dull-bred knife, the boy violently knocks the giant out cold, sending him crashing face-first onto the ruined pavement. Standing over the defeated brute, the kid casually tells him to cool his head and remember to pay for the tavern's damages. As the dust finally settles, a shining silver pendant shaped like a sword, the awestruck crowd gasps in sheer disbelief as they recognize the rare artifact. It's an official, highly coveted entry token to the upcoming tournament. The narrative officially introduces the seemingly powerless kid as the Bedlam tournament's ultimate wild card, Blade number 101, Shu Koga. Clenching his silver pendant with a dark, intense smile, Shu stares off into the distance, quietly muttering that there is still someone he desperately needs to settle a score with. He is the true monster they've been whispering about, the undisputed Mage Blade Slayer. The scene cuts away from the ruined tavern, soaring up to a grand, imposing fortress looming under the sky. Deep inside its cold, shadowed halls, a cloaked informant delivers an urgent report to a towering, heavily tattooed figure, the legendary Lord Sword God. The servant confirms that the real Mage Blade Slayer has finally shown himself and is already causing involved in a duel in the royal capital. The wicked, bloodthirsty smirk stretches across the sword god's scarred face. He laughs deeply, highly amused by the destruction, calling the boy a wild child. The giant carelessly waves off the incident, deciding to let Shu play around as much as he likes for now. Tightening his massive grip around the hilt of his enormous blade, the towering warrior slowly turns his gaze toward the distance, his eyes burning with anticipation. A wicked smile creeps across his scarred face as he quietly mutters that Shu has kept him waiting. For 3 long years. An eerie silence consumes the grand hall before a terrifying wave of excitement spreads through the sword god's overwhelming presence. His blood begins to boil at the thought of finally meeting the one person capable of challenging him. Looking into the empty air, he lets out a deep, sinister laugh before issuing his final, chilling challenge. Come on, Shu. Stop keeping me waiting. And hurry up and kill me already. The sword god's bloodthirsty grin widens as his laughter echoes throughout the fortress, bringing the chapter to an unforgettable close. And that's where today's episode comes to an end. If you enjoyed this recap and want to see what happens next, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more awesome manga recaps. Until next time, thanks for watching.